Founders of the Future with Joe Mardell. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Founders of the Future podcast. Today I'm here with Genevieve, the founder and CEO of AgriLedger. Genevieve, it's great to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
AgriLedger is an innovative blockchain startup that is transforming the agriculture sector. And Genevieve, it's very clear to me that this is a cause that's quite close to your heart. So I think it would be great if you could just take us all the way back to when you first got into the blockchain scene, and how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. Actually, I got into the blockchain scene by somewhat of an accident. I decided to change jobs. And the first week, my boss says to me, "How would you be interested in going to South Africa?" And I love traveling, so of course, I'm not going to say no. And she says, "There's this new thing that is being looked at," and this was working with Absa Bank, which at the time was owned by Barclays. And this was 2015 April. So that was a seminal moment, because that was right when the announcement was the spin-off, the splitting, not spin-off really, splitting of Stellar and Ripples. So that was Jed McCabe. That's when he was starting Stellar Foundation. We also had in the room R3. R3 at that time was 10 individual. And then I came in with Identrust, which was an organization which looked at identity management. So one of the things which is most people, I don't know, understand, but blockchain is about cryptography at the end. And also identity management is around cryptography. For a long time, I was saying blockchain is just crypto identity on acid, because now you're basically putting a whole bunch of them together instead of one identity. You're just identifying to the hilt. And the project was looking with the possibility of creating neobanks. So in 2015, now we have neobanks up the wazoo for young girls in South Africa, to support them not only in their financial education and saving, and this was bringing in health, and then looking at healthcare, buying. So really the whole ecosystem of how would you envelope someone, teach them the value of money. So when they're buying very cheap songs per se, and then once that you're looking at 16 to 18-year-old, and what people don't realize, the biggest influencer in the house is actually the 16 to 18-year-old, because they're the ones who are demanding the attention. They're the most valuable persons. That's who makes sure that the parents have a car, makes a lot of this economic decisions are made around them. So by having them involved in this new technology, you would then be able to even spread it out to their parents who needed to pay their worker. So getting that Neo account on the blockchain to then pay the people that need to be compensated, to pay for their gas, pay for their food. So you're now starting to look at the use of crypto across everything, which is housing, food. So the Maslow, food and water being things that you would be able to expand with. So that was when I first learned about blockchain, and I was like, wow, not really so interested in the financial aspect, because I was coming from a bank. So I'd been doing finance for almost 20 years by then. But what I found fascinating was this idea that you didn't need to have somebody else double check that something had happened, because the system had it, and you were agreeing to events. So if I gave you something, you would agree at the time that I've given it to you, which means that cryptographically, it has been evidenced that we've had this exchange, and we don't need somebody else to come in to mediate this for us. So that led me into thinking of, I was doing the work with Identrust, and I then got a phone call in November, a friend of mine, which was in India, and said, "Have you heard about blockchain?" And I'm like, please. Because by that time, for the whole summer, I had done a presentation on identity and blockchain for Horizon 2020, working with a lot of people on the ground, created consortiums around that. And in reality, it was before its time, but it was great thinking because I got to meet many of the people who are on the scene. Some of them are undercover in the scene. They're not the one making the noise, but really well thought leaders in the field of blockchain, and really thinking about how we could take it further. What were the, even creating thought leadership and presentations for the like of the OECD to explain where could you actually put this in how you enact laws, how you look at getting consensus. So when my friend called me, he said, "We're creating a blockchain service company. Would you be interested?" I was like, "Oh, yes." So moved there in February. And then a few months later, there was a call out by Singularity University, which was looking for how would you um, take technology today and really change the life of a million. So the big thing about me is I love food. I've rarely met food that I didn't want to taste. It does need to look a little bit good, so I'm not interested in bugs or any of those things. I will admit that I've tried, but not doing much for me. When you're in China and they offer you a silkworm, you try it just to say, didn't thrill me because it was just felt like cream with no taste. When you squirt it, and it was crunchy. I was like, no, 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 no.
No.
There's nothing in there. So I thought that the issue that we have around food globally is just tremendous. I mean, we can start from this thing with the FAO talking about zero hunger by 2030, which we're not doing good on because we're going backward. And when you think COVID has actually exacerbated the situation. We were increasing by 10 million a year, 60 million for the last 10 years. And they have predicted that for 2020 to 2021, they expect the number of people who are going hungry to be 100 million. So not doing good on those numbers. But if you start using things like blockchain technology, you can start looking as to where things are. So traceability gives you also capacity, and that capacity can tell you where there is more available. And because when we look at food, the waste, it's not just because we in the West throw out food. That's one problem, but it's actually the food from the farmer to the table doesn't make it. It gets spoiled. It's not stored properly. It doesn't even get bought out because they don't have the access to the market. So what that does is that there is this need to be not only able to get access to market, but also knowing where the food is. And the other problem, which is huge, is around food safety. Food safety is people getting sick. So the statistics right now, about 600 million people a year get sick from bad food, from food
Wow.
poisoning. And of that, 420,000 die. And of those 420,000, unfortunately, over 40% are children under the age of 5. So that's about 125,000 people, children dying, which if we think about that from the lost lives, if we say most people nowadays live to the age of 55, that's the human capital that we've lost is tremendous in terms of years life. So all those things were things that I thought, well, if you're going to use this technology, it's, there is two ways, is either you look at the emotional aspect or you look at the other emotional, which is money. And I wasn't interested. I'm like, the banks are doing this already. I'm not a big gambler. I don't believe in trying to teach people how to gamble. You can take chances. But I felt that for me, it wasn't about not understanding and actually appreciating crypto, but it was more that I wasn't going to teach people how to do crypto, but use that cryptography. So really, I didn't know how to name it first, but the digital twin of food, how can I then be assured that it is what it says it is? It is not going to make you sick because it has followed all the rules. It's been the right temperature. It has had all the right things done to it to make sure that it's safe. And then finally, the other thing which came in with the Haiti project was, how do you make sure that the farmer is also fairly compensated? So what we have done with our blockchain is not only do we trace the provenance of the product, we also trace the financial obligation of that product, which means if you, Joe, has been used as one of the people who has interacted in the transaction, then you're owed money for having participated. And based on the type of work that you're doing and what value you bring to this, proportionally compensating you, which is really how the world has moved into a service organization. So if we take Uber, you call the driver, he brings you from point A to point B, and for that, he's compensated for that, and that money is paid to him. For you, that could be actually from point A is taking you from your house to your job so that you can get then paid for doing that job. So if we look at that same thing and you think of, and where we started with Haiti is fruits, if you take that fruit and you now can track it all the way, and when the payment happens, pay everybody at the same time, you can then make sure that the farmer can retain ownership, and everyone along the line now is working for him. And there is nothing wrong with working for him if he then can trust that his money is going to come back to him. Because part of the problem is usually access to market is one problem. I can get my goods to market, but am I sure that you're going to tell me how much exactly was paid? Am I sure that you're going to make sure it gets there and pay me my money and come back with my money? And those things are anxieties that we want to remove from the farmer.
Mm. Yeah, that's great, and I can see that the farmers are going to receive a lot of value from being able to get that increase in trust throughout the whole value chain. But also, you mentioned that there's a big problem in the world right now with food, and we're possibly not going to have enough food to feed everyone in just a few years' time. So how is this blockchain system not only going to increase value for the farmers, but also help us to generate more food as a planet as a whole?
The thing is that we generate enough food as a planet. We just waste too much of it.
Mm.
So it is not a problem of generation of food. It is not about increasing productivity. It's about being very exact as to where the food needs to go, how it needs to be maintained. So making sure silos don't have rats running around them, making sure that the food, which is with a farmer, so right now, a lot of times, so we in the West are blessed by machination, which means that there is an overabundance of food. But unfortunately, 50% of the food is actually grown by smallholder farmers, and it is feeding about 60 to, depending on which one you look, 60 to 80% of the world. Some of them are feeding us, but many people in Asia and Africa, where you have the biggest problem, or even in the Americas, where you have the biggest problem about hunger, are not able to get the food from their farm to where it's needed. So I'm going to use Haiti as an example, looking at Haiti's numbers. They produce in value 1.4 billion, so 1.4 billion of food. They are basically exporting only 22 million of those produce, and they're importing 973 million. and people are still going hungry. Why? Because what's being imported is what needs to be used. So they're producing enough that they could eat, but it's not going from the farmer to those who need to eat it. And so you're importing food, which is probably 5, 6 times the price that people can pay. So ideally, you want to get communities to be able to get the food to those in their community who need it, and then the surplus being sold rather than importing food. And that's time and time again in many of those countries where hunger is prevalent. Also, what's happening is some of the food is just going to waste because there's no one coming in to buy it. And if you're selling it, it may not even be worth the effort that you've done in it. So we actually were lucky that now it's not just an idea. We've been able to prove that it changed. So even with COVID, we were able to go live in Haiti. It went live about a week delayed. Well, we first thought we'd be live at the end of March, but Mother Nature said, no, I don't got mangoes for you. So she decided to have her mangoes around mid-April. And if we recall, mid-April was when the world went to a screeching halt. It was like,
That's right.
stop. So the Haitian mango is usually sold to the American and Canadian markets only right now. And when the US went into lockdown, there was a flurry of trying to understand how do you then make exception for importation. There was also a question, is the virus going to be transported through surface? All these things that we didn't know. So there was a lot of anxiety, which meant also the FDA person, which does the certification, had to fly to Haiti. So all that meant that there was a delay. And finally, on May 1st, they did the first mission to Romon, which is in the north, the Plateau Central of Haiti, so in the central region of Haiti, to pick up mangoes. And they did about from May till the end of July, because actually there is a window by which you can import mangoes into the US. And so between that time, they basically did about 7 missions. The first one was screechingly hard, of course. The second one, you started to get a little more grease. Third one, and then finally, there were about 7 of them, 7 weeks, as they stopped for a couple of weeks in between to just get things right. But what ended up being is, if we looked at the market, so they were supposed to be at that time registering more farmers, but with COVID, obviously, you don't want to spread possibility of infection to anyone by going in trying to talk to them to get information. So those which were registered, so there was about 450 farmers which were registered, and about 218 of them, so over 50% almost, were actually contacted. And about 107 of them went all the way through 107 unique farmers. And that meant about 40,000 kg plus or minus went to the US. And that resulted in sales of almost $25,000. What's different is that in the past, the farmer would have sold that to the market, if he could get to market. And looking at the numbers, about 50% of them never sold. They would have gotten top price, about 50 cents a box. With the changes that were made, where now they were paying the service providers along the line, also having any obligations such as tax being taken into account, you're looking at a farmer making about $4.90 a box. That's about 600% increase from where he was before.
That is incredible. I never would have guessed it was that much. That's a mind-blowing statistic. But it really goes to show the power of the disruptive technologies like blockchain and just how much they can impact these communities. And what sort of second degree kind of impacts will this have on communities like Haiti, and how will this affect the wider economy of places like that?
If you think about it, this is a family who probably was hoping to get a check of $75 from, because there's been some handouts done by the the World Food Program, and I was reading this the other day online, and it was very interesting to see what some people did. Some people bought food. There was one lady, I loved her. She bought a goat because she said, you know what, with the goat, I can milk him and then I can sell him after he's grown. So it was very interesting to see what people did. The purpose of this is really to create, it doesn't ask them to increase their production. It's what you got. Once they have the money, we expect that, you know, if you think about it, the social, so it's not being tracked, but it is as expected. Now they have money to send their children to school. They have money to feed themselves. So now we start looking at the SDGs in a different way. So the first one is about end to poverty. Then it's end to hunger, zero hunger. Then you look at education, gender equality. And what's going to be funny is the infrastructure, which is one of the things that the government was looking at, infrastructure and also roads will have improvement, because now if I need to be able to sell my goods and the transportation needs to be there, that's going to be also an impact. It is not being measured because the group is pretty small, but I would love to understand what has been the impact given the fact that there's been a decrease in remittance. So the IMF has been talking that there's a 20% globally decrease in remittance because most of the people who would be sending money back to their home country are losing their jobs, or they're getting these checks. You know, if I'm only getting 600 a week from the US government, I don't have money to send to somebody else in Haiti to send their kids to school or to get food, because now I need to feed myself. And this is a global problem. Haiti's GDP, about 25% of it is reliant on remittance. The other thing that was very interesting to learn from the IMF report was that actually about what happens is that money doesn't only have the impact on the person who's receiving it, it has an impact on the economy, because a central bank would usually use those remittances to be able to get loans and liquidity from diverse organizations. But with that decrease, then that means there's a less opportunity for them to get that liquidity, which then means that it's a double whammy problem, because there's no cash coming into the country and there's no way to actually look to shore the country that way. So I think that by making sure in these countries that the farming, the agricultural sector can actually be producing and also creating money, you then have a knock-on effect, which is in that community itself, there is now less stress in terms of food security. And you then see also, I would expect to be able to see less child labor being used, because you don't need to have that, and you have a better assurance of life and health for that community.
Absolutely. And I'm fascinated to hear how it makes you feel working in this space and having such a huge impact on a country like Haiti. It must be a really fulfilling experience to have that kind of contribution.
I was born in Haiti, so I left when I was a teenager and moved to the US. It wasn't like I targeted Haiti,
Mm.
but 2018, it was just like the kismet thing, because Haiti decided to put out a call for a blockchain solution. And for me, I had always looked at agriculture, because I think that's where you're going to see the revival. And that's also where you have the greatest level of poverty. And if you can uplift those individuals, that is then, and obviously it's empowering. It's where I think this is the power of the blockchain, which is the democratization of access. So if you do your job right, you then can then have access. And for me, being able to prove this concept in the country of my birth was great, and mostly a country which has been ravaged by both, um, I don't know how to say it differently than bad luck. I mean, the hurricane, the um, the earthquake, all those things. But at the end, it is a country which is rich, not only, by the way, in agricultural capability, but also in brain power. You have very intelligent individuals coming from there. And I think, and it's across the world, but we all know if you don't eat properly, your brain doesn't work. If you don't have the opportunity to go to school and apply yourself, your brain doesn't work. So you lose that opportunity. And I think that we have demonstrated through the pandemic that we can work from anywhere. So why does somebody now need to emigrate to another country? Why do you need to take yourself out of the comfort of your loved ones in order to be successful? We should be able to, technology, give access for prosperity to everyone, no matter where they live. Obviously, they have to be empowered to then demand the services. Like we demand from our government to put in place the right tools for us to be able to work and prosper. So we now need to give them that opportunity. So one of the things that I started doing is I fortuitously heard about a consensus giving scholarships to women for their boot camp that they're starting in September. So I said, hold on. And within 24 hours, I had my partners in Haiti. I called them, I said, guys, can you get 10 women, 10 young women, which have enough knowledge about technology, who are developers, to take them through this boot camp. So they did that. There was about 25. They brought it down to about 14, and 10 spaces were given in terms of scholarship. That now means that we're going to have 10 women in Haiti, which are going to be trained in Solidity, in blockchain technology, not only to be able to provide the support that is needed and knowledge which is needed in Haiti, because most people think of blockchain as Bitcoin and Ethereum coins, so crypto. There's so much more to the technology that you can do. So that will give them that knowledge. And I decided, you know what, that's not enough. I'm not happy with just Haiti. So I decided to double down, and I called a friend in South Africa, and we're getting 10 for South Africa also. So there's going to be 20 ladies globally which are going to be trained in this. Obviously, Consensus is looking at about a class of about, they have other partners which are doing that, but I wanted to make sure, because it's not a journey that I can take on my own. It's a movement. And in order to get that movement, to have others at the table with you, because there's many tentacles to this problem that I'm not able to solve. I just want to be the core. And from the core, you have the tentacles, which are providing the solution to make our life better for all. It doesn't mean that we all need to be rich, but we should all be able to eat and get educated and not be worried about water or anything. It makes for a much more peaceful and much more contented world.
Absolutely. It's truly inspirational to hear about you starting this movement, and it really is just the start. 20 women going into blockchain is absolutely amazing, but I believe this is just the beginning. It's only going to get more and more, and the future is very exciting in this space. So I think we're going to probably call it a day now, but thank you so much, Genevieve, for coming on the podcast. It's really been incredible to hear your story and hear your experiences with blockchain and helping countries like Haiti and South Africa get on